Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. And this is Mysticism and Oriental Religions, Part 1 by Ralph M. Lewis, FRC. An article taken from Rosicrucian Digest, Volume 18, Number 9, October 1940. Mysticism and Oriental Religions, Part 1 by Ralph M. Lewis, FRC. We hear considerable of the strange powers and accomplishments of the peoples of the Orient. Adventurers and explorers tell us over the radio and in newspaper accounts of the amazing, almost miraculous feats of these peoples of the enigmatic East. Even our unemotional, methodical Western science that has contributed so much to our 20th century civilization, with its expansion of transportation and communication, and with all of those luxuries that we look upon as necessities of the day, is inclined to turn its eyes from the vagaries of the microscope and the great voids seen within giant telescopes to look with wonder upon the Orient, to speculate as to whether or not these peoples have in some manner discovered some law, some precept for the control or direction of natural phenomena not yet conceived by the Western mind. This mystery which seems to shroud the peoples of the Orient is particularly aroused by their strange customs, both physical and mental as well as social, their attitude toward life and philosophical views. These customs of theirs are deeply rooted in their religions, and if we are to attempt an understanding of them, it is best that we know something of their religious views and compare them with our own. The principal religion of the Western world is Christianity. Christianity has some 680,400,000 followers throughout the world. It is admitted that perhaps the major portion of these are nominal, that is, they merely profess to be Christians. In North America alone, there are 40 million Christians of various denominations. Christianity conceives its God as being theistic, that is, a divine personality that transcends the entire universe, and yet is immanent in it in knowledge and action. This God, according to Christianity, attempts to establish a theocracy on earth. In other words, all mankind shall recognize him as the sovereign law of the universe and shall govern themselves principally by his divine decrees. Further, Christianity conceives its God as being monotheistic, a one God. There are no lesser gods, there are no other gods of any kind. His relationship to man is that of a father to a child. It is a parental relationship, benevolent, munificent, extending a grace or love to all of mankind, irrespective of their foibles and their transgressions. He has given mankind a will to choose and follow in his footsteps, or to deviate along a course of evil. One of the principal doctrines of Christianity is that of the original sin. The original sin conceives man as having once been born of a divine essence, and having been equal in divinity and perfection to the Father. But through temptation and because of the will to choose, man chose worldly desires in the allegorical Garden of Eden and fell from grace. From that time on, according to the Christian doctrine of the original sin, man's soul was contaminated. He no longer was of the status of his father insofar as his divinity was concerned. Consequently, to redeem himself, he had to seek salvation through the agency that God had established, namely the Church. Further, Christianity contends, and in this sense it is not unlike many of the philosophical systems of the ancient world and those of today, that empirical knowledge is a specious false knowledge. It is not of God, nor is it a true representation of divine things. The only true knowledge which man receives, so declares Christianity, is that which comes to him through the medium of revelation. But the individual himself can no longer have these revelations. If he does, they are not the true ones. The only revelations which are authorized and recognized by the Church are those had by the traditional disciples, those mentioned in the Christian Bible. They constitute the divine truths which man must accept. Christianity as a religion is also paradisaic. It looks toward a paradise, a place of liberation from all of the temptations, trials, and tribulations of the world as a reward for salvation and for adherence to its doctrines. Christianity is not the only paradisaical religion, but one of the principal ones. It obliges man, therefore, to prepare himself during his entire mortal existence for the eventual paradise, and to save himself because of the inherited contamination of his original sin. Now, let us contrast with Christianity one of the principal religions of the Orient, Mohammedanism, also known as Islamism. Mohammedanism has some 209 million followers throughout the world, but though less than half of the number of Christianity, a far greater portion of them are devout in their religion, sincere and conscientious in their practice and worship, and in no sense of the term can they be called merely nominal followers, or those who just profess to be Mohammedans. Mohammedanism began, or we should say, was caused by the strange influence of a black stone that fell from the heavens centuries ago. No one knows exactly when. According to tradition, the prophet Abram drove one of his concubines, Hagar, and her young son into the desert, and they journeyed for many days, and the journey was severe. They encountered many dangers, made many sacrifices, and finally sheer exhaustion overtook them, and the young son, overcome by thirst, had thrown himself upon the sands to abandon life. Suddenly there fell from heaven near him a black stone, and simultaneously with its impact upon the sands, there sprang up nearby a plentiful and cool spring of water, as mother and son quenched their thirst in it. They heard a voice that told the son that he would live to manhood, and would raise an army in the future to turn against his father and to exact retribution for the injustices which had been inflicted upon his mother. Leaving aside the tradition, we can understand that this black stone was a meteorite. It fell on the desert of Arabia, where now is the holy city of Mecca. Such an awe-inspiring phenomenon must have deeply impressed the simple minds of the desert nomads. To them, it was an augury of some happening in the heavens, some sign for man, an omen of what was to take place. There was no other way for them to explain it. The stone immediately became sacred to them and was preserved. A long, black cube-like temple was built in which the stone was enshrined, and both the temple and stone which was placed in the east were called the Kaaba. Pilgrimages throughout the Orient were made by peoples to see this sacred stone and to offer prayers and oblations in front of it. The peoples of Arabia, the tribesmen, were polytheistic. They had local gods and tribal gods, but regardless of their controversies and dissension about their myriad religious beliefs, they all looked upon the Kaaba as sacred. Mecca, therefore, became a great commercial center, a wealthy place because of these pilgrimages, because of the days spent in it by those who visited it. Every Mohammedan, even today, makes all sorts of personal sacrifices and saves so that sometime, once at least during his lifetime, he may trek to Mecca. Then he indicates the fact that he has gone to Mecca, made this sacred pilgrimage by winding about his tarbush fez, a colored ribbon. The number of bands on the tarbush determines the number of times, and very, very few are able to afford more than one journey across the desert. However, in the 7th century, a great flood almost devastated Mecca. It destroyed the Black Temple. It swept the sacred Kaaba from its place in the east of the temple to the ground. The tribes joined forces and restored the temple. But when it came to replacing the Kaaba, the black stone of the east, controversy waged furiously. What tribe was to be so honored, to have one of its number replace the stone? Whoever would dare touch it would become blessed and become a man with divine powers, a man ordained for great things, a man commanding the respect of all the peoples of the land, a man among men. And so there was no agreement as to which tribe should have such an honor. And as days went by, all concerned became more desperate. And it was finally decided that the next man who should pass through the gate into the courtyard of the temple would be chosen to replace the Kaaba. One Kutam, a prosperous merchant, who conducted one or more caravans across the desert yearly in trading pilgrimages, when returning to Mecca after one of them, attracted by the crowds and cries and activity around the Kaaba temple, went to see what was taking place. Pushing his way through the jostling crowd, he dared to open the gate and step inside. Immediately he was proclaimed by all present as the man selected to replace the Kaaba. Kutam, a tall, handsome, black-bearded desert man, consented, and removing his burnous, he very gently placed the sacred stone on it and solemnly walked with it into the temple, and there placed it in its customary position. The chieftains had predicted rightly. He became a marked man. The word spread as to what he had done and how he had been chosen, and what powers he must now possess. He was no longer known as Kutam, but was called Muhammad, which means the Blessed. The experience undoubtedly impressed Kutam himself, and inclined him more than ever towards religious matters. During future treks across the desert and at night under the shelter of his black goatskin tent, we can conceive him meditating upon what had taken place in his life. He also entered into religious conversation with many of the Semitic and Hebrew traders whom he met on his journeys. The Hebrews had a monotheistic religion, and they told him of the only God of Jehovah, supreme above all, accounting for all phenomena, and to whom everything and everyone was subordinate. Muhammad saw in this monotheistic religion a solution to the problems of his peoples. He saw that one God could unite them into a powerful nation and bring them the salvation they sought, that they could work together instead of against each other. He was likewise deeply impressed by the stories about the Hebrew prophets and wise men, and when he returned to Mecca, he told his wife of his experiences and informed her that he was going to retire to a desert cave of which he had knowledge and there meditate for days. It is not coincidence that many of these messiahs and avatars are said to have ascended a mountain or retired to a cave, because caves and mountains have an allegorical and mystical meaning and must not always be accepted literally. Eventually, after striving for some illumination in the cave, Muhammad had a great theophanic experience, and a voice spoke to him long and loud and told him many things. And his soul was indeed enlightened. Principally, he was advised that there was no God but Allah. He was the supreme God and the only God. We can see in this the influence of Hebrew monotheism. Further, he was told that he, Muhammad, was Allah's prophet, and that it was his duty to go among the peoples, his peoples, and spread this doctrine. Then he was told many other things, all of which he wrote down. He hurried back to Mecca and preached of Allah in the streets, stating that he was Allah's prophet, and exhorting the tribesmen to abandon their faith and their false gods, lest Allah punish them. At first they were amused, and then as he became insistent, they were aggravated, annoyed, and indignant at his desecration of what they held to be sacred. But we must not forget that Mohammedanism is called Islamism as well. Islamism means submission, and one of the principles of Mohammedanism is that men must submit to Allah, no matter what means are employed. They must realize that Allah is supreme, and his will must be done, so force was employed to bring submission to Allah among Muhammad's fellow countrymen. Much bloodshed occurred, but Mohammedanism spread, and the sects were eventually united. After all, a single God was needed, and the tribesmen were quite ready for such a conception. One of the criticisms of Mohammedanism by Christians and by those who have not given the religion even a cursory examination or study is that a Mohammedan is a fatalist, that he conceives his entire life as mapped out for him, and that Allah has prepared everything and he must just resign himself to constant divine direction by Allah. That is not true. The Mohammedan plans, conceives, maps out, and exercises initiative in his mundane affairs as does anyone else. He tries to direct his life as much as anyone, but ultimately whatever may come to pass out of these affairs, he accepts as the will of Allah. Thus, if he plans to take a journey and makes every effort to do so, expends energy and time, and something comes to pass that the journey does not materialize, then he says that it is the will of Allah. From this view, we can see that the Mohammedan is not truly a fatalist. The principal sacred book or the Bible of the Mohammedan is the Quran. In size, it is about equal to the New Testament of the Christian Bible and contains possibly 1,000 surahs or verses. It does not concern itself so greatly with afterlife and immortality or with man's reward hereafter as does the New Testament of the Christian Bible. It is rather a code of ethics and book of morals by which the individual is to guide his life here and now and find on earth most of the reward of righteousness. It is admitted by scholars of comparative religions and particularly of Oriental literature that the surahs, written as a result of Muhammad's theophanic experiences during the early part of his life, are more inspiring and more lofty than those which represent the later years of his life. To be concluded, thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe and comment, and if you can please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.